Okay. Well, everyone, welcome to the second annual UFO Crash Retrieval Conference. I'm glad that you all made it here, and I'm delighted to see everybody, the old faces and the new faces. And I think it's a tremendous program, and I wanted to give you a preview of that tonight. Here we're going to do a little panel. I wanted to start first with a few sort of introductory remarks. Those people that are staying at the hotel may have gotten hotel coupons and gambling coupons and so forth. This is Las Vegas. They give those things out. For those people that have been observant, down on the floor, there are Men in Black slot machines. And there's a few alien slot machines, too, with abducted. If you get abducted through a cross, you win, 5x or 10x your money. So it's interesting that they have that sort of thing here at this hotel. I discovered it first time when I came. Just as a process thing, all the bathrooms are outside. Feel free to get coffee or dessert or water during this process. Nobody's going to be upset. Just don't walk in front of the cameras, I don't think, or try to avoid that. They're here in the front. There is a whole vendor area downstairs along the windows in the aisle. Fate magazine is giving away free Fate magazines, I think the October issue, so make sure to get your free Fate magazine if you'd like for anybody attending the conference. The conference proceedings are all printed, 260 pages of them. For $25, they're outside. They have all the talks in them. Some are complete written papers. Others are PowerPoint presentations. I'd urge you to get them because after the conference, they go up by $10, which is normal. So this is a great compendium. And Marcel, who created it and is also the webmaster of UFOconference.com and MajesticDocuments.com, claims and that he caught more typos and more errors from all the speakers this time. He studied longer and fixed it and did a better job than last year. So I applaud Marcel. He did a lot of hard work to do that. The process here that we wanted to do is to have the speakers come up that are talking tonight or tomorrow or over the weekend and give a little 2 to 3 minute introduction about their talk and what they're going to be saying and what's novel and interesting. And I've asked Stephen Bassett to moderate that and to have you, the audience, participate and ask questions of the panelists after they give their little talk. For those people that feel uncomfortable coming to a microphone or having it come to them, there are little pieces of paper that you can write notes down or write questions down on, and we'll take some questions from the audience that are on paper and allow you to get your question into a certain person that way as well. As of present in the room, I think Nick Redfern, our first speaker tomorrow morning, is not here. He hasn't checked into the hotel yet. I think he had a plane problem. So Nick can't be here at this point, but he'll be here tomorrow, hopefully bright and early. Otherwise, we'll have to rearrange the schedule. There's no changes to the schedule that I'm aware of at this point. The other person that I know is on an airplane is Dr. David Pace. He's flying in from New York. At this time, won't come in until like 11:30 or 12. For those people that are also interested, Coast to Coast is doing a live broadcast from the hotel radio station. How many people know where the hotel radio station is? A couple people. That's good. We did a live broadcast last year, but if you go down onto the casino floor and sort of stay near the front of the hotel and keep walking around, you'll come to a glass booth near the nightclub. And the glass booth, you'll be able to see in and see Linda and see this people being interviewed. And I believe the audio feed will go out onto the floor, provided there's no live rock band at this place next door. So it's best to go early. I think that Linda starts at 10 to 2 a.m. So best to go early if you want to see that. Tonight. And she'll be interviewing, I believe, 8 speakers from the conference and giving little episodes and snippets and samples of that whole process. I guess with that introduction, I will turn it over to Stephen and ask all the speakers to come up and get along the tables and be mentally prepared to give their 3-minute monologue. So, thank you.
Good evening. How are you? Really appreciate all of you coming out to Vegas to this important conference. I'm Steve Bassett. I really envy Robert, Dr. Robert Wood and Ryan Wood, that a father and son could be involved in something of this magnitude, and I mean the field itself, the issues itself, be able to work toward some sort of resolution on something of this importance, something that they both have great passion for, and be able to do that at this point in their lives is a great gift, one I did not have. They have done exceptional work, particularly Robert, going back almost 40 years. This is only the second year of this conference. It's only going to grow in its importance. So I want to give them a hand for just being consistent and helping this move forward. Now, before we bring up the speakers to give us a couple of just a very quick 2-minute quick presentation, folks, we want to focus on the questions. And by the way, get those pieces of paper and write out your questions if you don't like to be in front of mics. And they'll pass them out, and we'll do our best to get as many questions in as possible. I think I've got a little quick story that is probably a perfect story to begin this crash retrieval conference. Well, there is Nick. Find it, Nick, right here, partner. I've been operating for the last 9 years out of Bethesda, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., the Beltway. My family, on the mother's side, has lived there since 1933. So I've been in and out of there since I was a little child. It seemed like no matter where I went, whether it was the Philippines or Florida or California, I always had to keep coming back to Bethesda. And I didn't really want to go back to Bethesda. I didn't really like it. I didn't like Washington. I was a California boy. I was born in, and I wanted to be there, and I wanted to surf and do all those neat things. But I kept coming back. I eventually found out why, because my life's work was going to be from there. And Bethesda is in Montgomery County, which is the second richest county in the country. The first richest county in the country is Fairfax County, which is just across the river from Washington in Virginia. And the big city in that county, Fairfax, is McLean. McLean is where the CIA and the big government operatives and high-end bureaucrats tend to live, and they live very, very well. Bethesda is the hoity-toity high-end city in Montgomery, and it's really nice. It's a very cool place, big township, and a lot of government scientists live there. And And part of the reason is not that far from the Navy labs and the Army labs. For a number of years, I was aware of a party that's held there every year, and I went to it twice. These guys all get together, mostly guys. There are a few women, but it's mostly men. And they have a party just to hang out, and they hold it at a nice home for one of these gentlemen right near the Burning Tree Country Club, right, which is probably the most exclusive country club in the United States. And what I discovered when I went the first time was that, you know what they like to talk about when they all get together? We're talking GS 14, 15, 16, PhD physicist, PhD metallurgist, biologist. They like to talk about UFOs. And they have big libraries in their houses. And what I discovered is the number of these people who in the government are perfectly aware of the presence of extraterrestrials is valid is far more than you would ever know. And why would you not know? Because, look, you're working for the government. You're a GS-14. You make about $150,000 a year. You got a great career, all right? Your spouse also works for the government, and the two of you together are bringing in about $200,000 to $265,000 a year. You live in a $1 million house. You have a fine career. You are aware of the ET reality from any number of sources. You're not going to run down to the New York Times. You're not going to suddenly run to the nearest UFO MUFON group or something and say, I know the truth. You're not going to do any of that. What you're going to do is you're going to do your job, and you're going to say, this is not my issue. This is not my subject. When the government is ready to deal with this openly, it will do so. In the meantime, I'll do my job. But they know about it. You better believe that they know about it. So, I was invited to come to this party once for the purposes of meeting somebody from the CIA. And I did. Had a nice chat. Nothing much happened about it. And then I got invited again. And I went back and I talked with this gentleman again. Sort of, this is a common thing that's done, where you have these opportunities just kind of meet so they can take your measure, right? You see, one of the huge problems, if you're inside government, is who you deal with and who are they and what are they doing? And so you got to find out about them a little bit, see what they're like, in case they're nuts. And there are some nuts people out there. So I did that. And then recently, this is very recent, within the last 2 months, I was invited to come to a little dinner party. They wanted me to talk with someone. Again, I'm almost certain this was a take the measure of the person kind of get-together. And this was at Bethesda home of one of these scientists. There's about 7 of us there. And so I went, no problem. And we just had basically a casual evening, had some Chinese food brought in, and we sat around, we talked about a lot of things. But the focus was the sort of, not the guest of honor, but an individual that they knew of. The story behind how they knew him and why is not really relevant, but the point is they knew him, and they wanted me to talk to him. Who was he? He was a 40-year retired career command sergeant major in the Army intelligence, going all the way back to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. Someone who had done it all, and I mean it all. He was an African American. He looked exactly like every command sergeant major you would ever imagine on television, all right? And he was there with his wife. He was fully retired, but always involved in some projects, because one of the things you learn is that when you leave intelligence, this is also true of the KGB, you never have to worry about money again. The average retiree from like the Navy or the Army or whatever, they go out, maybe they play some golf, they may get another job. And intelligence is different. You have connections, wonderful connections, and there's always something happening. You get drawn in, you make a quick 100,000, 200,000. KGB operates the same way. No problem. And he did a little of that, so he's very well off. And there's something else you need to know. This man wouldn't testify before Congress if you put a gun to his head. Wasn't a witness, wasn't a whistleblower, had the slightest interest in talking publicly about this subject. He was a full Republican Bush supporter, doesn't like Kerry at all. All right? There you go. Here's the setup. We talked all night, but we didn't, but about many things, but in the conversation, a few things were covered, which is one of the reasons why I was there. Not at length, just some basic things. These were: 1, he was fully aware of at least 5 crashed extraterrestrial vehicles. 2, he was fully aware of the retrieval of the material from those vehicles. Right? He was fully aware of the extraterrestrial presence. Specifics. They pushed him. They wanted to. I think one of the reasons that the scientists were kind of there in a way was they were hoping that in the interchange he might give out some more material, so they'd push him for where did they crash, what, and he would do it. He said that's all I can tell you right now. He may have told them other things at other times, but overall, in that context, that's all he said. And then he threw in one more thing, I think, just to sort of, not impress me, but just sort of give me something a little new. He said, there's one thing you might be surprised about. The location, the center of activity of the U.S. government involvement in this issue is not where you think it is. I said, well, where is it? He said, it's in West Virginia. So I looked into that a little bit, and what I discovered was that West Virginia has a number of NSA facilities. It also has the very famous underground bunker system that was built for the Congress, which is now sort of a tourist thing. And then, actually, but at the event, I asked him, well, what are some of the reasons for that? And he said, the West Virginia hills, those mountains up there, are some of the densest rock in the country. I mean, it's very dense material. He says you bore in and you bore down, and once you get down there, nobody is going to have any indications. It's odd when you have a conversation like that, isn't it? Odd. I don't need my views on this confirmed, but I'll tell you, this work is kind of tough, and so it's nice when somebody like that confirms it to you dead out, all right? They know, all right? Now, where is this going to go? I don't know. I was approached again, though, for another meeting with someone in the CIA. I don't know why. However, the information I was provided at the time basically indicated that there were things going on, and it would be a good thing if the current president became the next president-elect, that would support some processes. And that's all I know at this time, meaning that if President Bush had lost the election, this meeting might not have taken place. So that's my little story, right, to get things going here. But if the time comes when I can get in more names and things like that, I will. But one thing I want you to remember as you listen to these gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen over the weekend, that we hear about the General Twining and the General Ramey, and we hear about this officer, and we hear about that leader and how they did this and did that. Don't forget that every one of these people, they were just in charge. They're managers. Everything that they supposedly ordered or did was carried out by others, by non-coms and enlisted. There are thousands of people who have worked for the United States government that have directly interfaced with this issue. And it is primarily because of their devotion to the country and patriotism that they have honored their oaths, and they have simply retired and been quiet about it. I honor that completely. I do not object in any way. On the other hand, those who have come forward and been explicit about it, I honor them too. You see, you need to have both in a society, right? But you're hardly alone here, and these people at this podium are hardly alone. There is a massive welling of understanding and interest and desire to reach out and connect with the general public on the part of inside of government, which inevitably leads to the resolution of this issue. Now, in order to get going, what we need is a quick presentation of 1 or 2 minutes from each of our speakers, and I will start, I think, with this end of the table, with a very famous Texan, another famous Texan, Jim Mars. Jim, come on up here.
So I got 3 minutes, right? 2.5. For me, 1.5. Okay, in dealing with the UFO situation, I have often really thought to myself, so many sightings going all the way back to the 50s and all the way forward. There's always some rationale. It's satellites. It's government test craft. It's misidentified commercial and military aircraft. So I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if there was really a well-documented incidence of a UFO sighting and interaction before any of that stuff was up there? And there is. And I'll tell you about it tomorrow morning at 9:30. It's the spaceship crash in Aurora, Texas on April the 17th, 1897, 6 years before the Wright brothers ever flew, and 6 years before the first powered dirigible flight in this country, the California Era, which lifted off the same year that the Wright brothers flew. And you're going to be amazed at this story. Now, if that doesn't boggle your mind, if I have the chance, I'm going to tell you one of the most fantastic stories And I wouldn't even bring this up because you'll laugh me out of the room when I tell you the bottom line. But if you let me tell you the full details, your hackles will raise. The first of this year, I'm in Roswell on a totally separate thing, but we were doing some video shooting in what is now the New Mexico Rehabilitation Center. And this is an old hospital out on what used to be Walker Air Force Base. It was the base hospital. And in the course of doing this shoot, I stumbled across this story. I went back to Roswell with a camera team. We have 16 people, from the assistant to the executive director to the maintenance people, to the elevator operators, to the telephone operator, to nurses, to registered nurses, and they all tell the same story. The hospital is haunted. Okay? No big deal. As an old police reporter, I came across lots of stories about hauntings in hospitals. I guess it's because people die in hospitals, okay? But this one is different. This one, there are people who are on the camera, signed releases, who said they have seen this apparition, and it's not human. It's very small, about 4 foot tall, with great big head, great big dark eyes. I said, sounds like an alien. So then I found out that the New Mexico Rehabilitation Center indeed was the Walker Air Force Base Hospital, which was built in 1950 on the exact site of the Roswell Army Airfield Hospital, where, according to legend, dead aliens were taken in 1947. Tune in tomorrow for all the details.
Well, I'm definitely going to attend that presentation because my hackles haven't been raised in quite some time. Now, our next, one of the legendary researchers in this field, been around a long time, the very charming and lovely Linda Moulton Howe.
If any of you have been looking at earthfiles.com the last week or two, you know that I've had stories up about a little bit of new information concerning a crash retrieval that many people dismissed as possibly just mythology or muddy waters, but I'm talking about the plains of San Augustine, and we're going to have a gentleman here this weekend who's going to be talking about some very strange and very thin foil-like metals. His name is Chuck Wade, that they found in a dig this summer. And when you listen to what Steve was saying about how many are there and what Bob Wood is going to be presenting in terms of the numbers, at least through Len Stringfield's archives, how many of these round discs came down out of the skies, not just in this country, but other parts of the world, and that the physical evidence is still there to be found by people who are willing to go out and spend the time. And you will be seeing, you can go to Earth Files and you can see some of this strange foil in cross-section. And right now they have a very interesting lab analysis on it, but more work needs to be done. But when you find something out in the plains of San Augustine in a place that Art Campbell is convinced is a crash site that has silicon, iron, and aluminum in what are patterns of what appear to be organized distribution, it reminds me of the same issue that we ran into with the bismuth magnesium that I've reported about and investigated since '96. Completely different elements, but something constructing in ways that have to do with the distribution of molecules and elements themselves, completely different than what has been traditional construction as far as humans on this planet. And I say this to stress with those of you in the audience that one of the things about this conference that Bob and Ryan Wood are trying to do that I think is significant, and that is to stress the harder physical evidence and, where possible, firsthand testimony, and that I myself have become convinced that the majestic documents that Bob Wood and Ryan worked so hard on for such a long time do hold some of the keys to why is it that Harry S. Truman president in 47 would have, as far as I understand, have had a classified executive order that was passed on to Eisenhower and, as far as I know, is in existence to this day. And that it boils down to that all of the denial, all of the misinformation was considered to be a super patriotic position to take. And that the executive order would make it impossible for anyone working with a need to know in the magic, whatever the classification was, to speak about any knowledge. In fact, their orders were and are to this day to lie and misinform unless there was a strategic reason to plant information for test and manipulation of the public and the press. That policy is in effect today, and for those of you who are attending, tomorrow I'm going to be trying to give what I think are some insights from my own work about why this country still has a policy of denial, a strict policy of denial in the interest of national security, because a group of intelligent men in the 40s came to the conclusion that their higher priority as super patriots was to sustain the national security, keep the peace, and prevent panic. See you tomorrow. I'm after lunch.
Okay, now we'll bring up the son of the Robert and Ryan team.
Thanks, Stephen. One of the key things to think about is why do they keep this secret? Why have they been keeping it secret so long? And one of the things that my talk is going to focus on is the illegal acts that have been performed, particularly murder, around this topic to maintain secrecy. And so I chose to examine and create what I call a death database of people that I think are murdered because they were going to leak the secret or did leak the secret or otherwise with a pain in the butt to the control group. And it was an interesting process. Much of the talks are more fact-based, but I went with sort of all speculation and a little statistics. What I did is hired a remote viewer, Joe McMonagold, to look at 30 blind targets in envelopes of various people that I think were murdered. And some were ruled out. Everybody would be happy to know that John Mack, who recently died of a vehicular manslaughter accident, was not somebody that was murdered, according to Joe McMonagold. But I, again, contrast that with the statistics of what is the probability that you'll just die in your lifetime? 1 chance in 23. What is the chance that you'll die of a particular natural cause of death, or your official cause of death being suicide or hit by a car, and then the suspected cause of death, the murder by electrocution or something, and then roll up the statistics at the end about what's the overall chance that these 11 people that I talk about could have died sort of, in effect, randomly. And you discover that the odds are astronomical, that they had some linkage to the UFO field. So we'll look at various people, common people, famous people like James E. McDonald and Marilyn Monroe, Dorothy Kilgallen, JFK, RFK, people like that, and then less well-known people, John Ferry from the Marconi era in the UK, and other people you've never heard of that are fascinating stories. So it's a little bit of speculation and story with the psychic and statistics. Next year, I promise I'll be even more rigorous on the path.
Death database. Sounds like a new show for Fox. Next up, writer, producer, director, artist, Renaissance man from Pasadena, Paul Davids.
Thank you. It was 10 years ago that a film on which I was executive producer called Roswell, which starred Kyle MacLachlan and Martin Sheen and Dwight Yoakam, was broadcast nationally for the first time on the Showtime networks. And as the first feature-length dramatization of the Roswell incident brought a consciousness of this UFO event of 1947 to the public in a new way, a very widespread way that reached millions of people. I want to say we're fortunate to have the father of Roswell research with us at this conference. I'd like to acknowledge Stanton Friedman and his great contribution to this research. I spent most of my life as an arch skeptic on this topic. My father was a famous historian, American history, who taught at Georgetown University for his entire career, who worked with John F. Kennedy in the writing of the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage, and who had as one of his students young Bill Clinton. My dad sent me to Princeton, and I was very pragmatic, and I didn't put much stock in flying saucers or extraterrestrial contact at all. But that changed in 1987 when I had a daylight sighting incident at very close range with my two children. And it was, as I look at it now, a very life-transforming experience in a period of about 4 to 5 minutes, because whatever doubt I had that these flying discs existed was erased. That set me on the road to Roswell, the road to making the movie and living with this research over the last decade. I call my talk, which will be Sunday morning, I think, is it following your father's talk, following Dr. Wood's talk? Yes, after Dr. Bob Wood talks about Leonard Stringfield's crash retrieval reports. I'll be speaking at 10 o'clock Sunday morning. And I call it The Road to Roswell, a primer of undisputed facts and factual disputes. And just to give you a little preview, I'll let you know that the undisputed facts of the Roswell case will take me somewhere between 2 to 3 minutes to discuss. And the remaining 57 minutes we'll devote to the disputed facts. Because for every facet of the Roswell incident, there are not 2, but maybe 4, 5, 6, or 7 different points of view. Primarily, I'm going to share with you what I feel I've learned in the last 10 years since making the film. Because the knowledge, the database has expanded. There have been a lot of surprises. There have been some disappointments. And there have been a number of encouraging things for those of us who believe that, the incident at Roswell may have been a historical turning point for our nation. And I think that the statements of a number of astronauts, including the late Gordon Cooper, Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon, there were statements by Senator Barry Goldwater, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, and Dr. Robert Sarbacher, who was a dean of the Graduate School of Georgia Tech, wrote a letter confirming the recovery of crash saucers with alien occupants. General Douglas MacArthur made some very telling statements. There is a whole body of activities and statements that really would lead even a very skeptical person to feel that there is something here that's being concealed. And I want to talk to you about all sides of the issue on Sunday morning. Thanks.
His father helped write Profiles in Courage, taught Bill Clinton. I predict that one day his father was going to turn up in a Jim Marrs book. All right. Our next good friend, Ron Reger, is our next presenter. Ron?
Good evening. I want to thank you all for being here. How many of you watched the very popular show CSI, filmed right here? It's Cold Case. Anybody watch that? What I'm speaking about is sort of a combination of Roswell, Cold Case, and CSI. What I've done is there were some photographs taken in General Ramey's office that purportedly were the Roswell crash debris. People's memories over the intervening years get very fuzzy. They remember what they want to remember sometimes and misremember important details. However, these photographs still retain the truth of whatever it is was there when the image was made. Over time, that never changes. So what I've done is coordinate a team of researchers from the UK all the way to Moab, Utah. And what we're doing is analyzing what is in these photographs. What do they tell us? And so we're using a little forensic analysis, good solid engineering, and the images themselves to come up with 3 important elements to help solve the Roswell riddle. 1, General Ramey's holding a memo in his hand. We can read almost all of that now. 2nd, there's been a question, when was these pictures taken? Because this is a key element in determining all of the facts surrounding Roswell. If we could lock in one element of the photographic history or the Roswell history, then we could sort of sift everything in relation to that one element. We've done that. We can lock in the time that the Roswell photographs were taken. Another contingent element of the entire Roswell incident that you may be aware of is the ongoing argument, well, was there a press conference or wasn't there a press conference? And who did this and who did what? Who shot Harry? Turns out that we know that there were more than 2 photographers there. And I'll present evidence to conclusively show that. So it's a fun thing. It's a matter of, we're not talking in speculation. We're not talking about pie in the sky. We're talking about solid forensic evidence to conclusively show that there were more photographers, to conclusively pin down the exact time the photographs were taken. And what's a little more whimsical is the exact read on the Ramey memo and what this might mean. I look forward to seeing you all there. And welcome, you can ask me questions anytime. I'll be more than glad to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. All right, next is a good friend, Peter Robbins, one of the most literate and eloquent men in the field, and of course the founder who maintained a wonderful website for many years, UFOcity.com. Peter?
Thank you, Steve. I wanted to begin by thanking Ryan and Bob for inviting me back again, because my talk really deals with neither crashes nor retrievals. It does deal with one of the seminal cases of our time, though, and one that more and more Americans have some interest and a better understanding of, in part thanks to last year's sci-fi feature documentary called UFO Invasion at Rendlesham. I spent 9 years of my life traveling back and forth to England to put together, with Larry Warren, one of the eyewitnesses and the whistleblower on the case, the best book that we could to introduce Americans and many British people to what actually happened in those woods in Suffolk, England in December of 1980. Now, it has been more than 7 years since the book was published, but in that time, as I think many of my colleagues up here can attest, once you have a book in print, it doesn't mean the information stops coming to you. And information has continued to come to us over the intervening years that we have not published. And tomorrow, I will lay a good piece of it out for you. A more complete version of it is in the conference proceedings, which I would suggest everybody get a hold of. It looks like a particularly special one this year. We'll look at some interesting video clips, and I am open to questions about this straight through the weekend. It is a case, I think, that is the one that you could take to the bank. It has aspects of almost everything that embodies the field of ufology, from physical evidence to historic evidence to abduction to physiological changes in material, to military eyewitnesses, civilian eyewitnesses, paper trails, military and civilian both, and it's not going away. So I will be up right after lunch tomorrow. We'll look forward to seeing you all in the audience, and it's good to see all your faces here tonight. Good.
All right, now next we will hear from researcher Nick Redfern.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Well, I've decided I'm not going to speak about crashed UFOs. I'm going to talk about the flight I had to get here, which was a lot more interesting. But joking aside, what I'm speaking about is, I guess, a history of crashed UFO reports. And as credible as the Roswell case is, I guess there's a tendency to think in some respects that crashed UFOs are synonymous with Roswell and nothing else. But in reality, there are a lot of reports on record as credible, but in many cases, I guess, not as deeply investigated. And because they haven't been as deeply investigated, there aren't as many witnesses who've come forward. And the cases I'm going to talk about quite literally span the globe, from America, Russia, China, Puerto Rico, Europe, you name it, there's been a crash there. Australia, New Zealand, parts of South America. And what I want to try and do is concentrate on those cases where I've been able to obtain various pieces of official documentation through the Freedom of Information Act. And interestingly enough, a number of these documents actually confirm aspects of the MJ-12 documents. One particularly interesting case where some sort of object came down, and this is referenced and verified in some of the official files, and a number of people and animals in the direct vicinity were made violently ill by something associated with whatever this object was. And this is something we hear rumours of in connection with the Roswell story, that some of the people involved in the recovery either contracted some sort of virus or were taken very, very ill and died after the crash, after being in the immediate vicinity. So basically that's what I'm going to do, is concentrate on cases beyond Roswell, if you like, from around the world, and get across the fact that this is really a global phenomenon rather than just something isolated to New Mexico in the late 1940s, as valid as that case is. So hopefully there'll be some new information for you, new documents, and perhaps a new appreciation of how far and wide this whole thing spreads. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you. Quick reminder, again, if you think of any questions as these presentations are made, write them down, and just before we start, we'll collect those and do our best to answer them. Next up, researcher Chuck Wade.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Wade, and I was born and raised in the little town of Corona, New Mexico. I have known about these crafts being brought down most of my life. Thanks to Mr. Art Campbell, that was a presenter here last year, he discussed some of the things that he had found on the plains of San Augustine. Art was also a presenter at the UFO Symposium in Aztec, New Mexico in March of this year. After his talk, we became friends, and we decided we'd have a dig on the plains of San Augustine. So in June of this year, 9 of us converged on the plains of San Augustine and started digging. And within an hour, we started pulling up stuff. And I'm here to tell you, folks, we have found the plains of San Augustine crash site. And I'll tell you more about the metals Sunday afternoon. But one other thing that I think is absolutely imperative that you come and listen, and I will try to explain. I was a courier for Colonel Corso to the governor of the state of New Mexico. He passed me some information, handwritten. I made copies, gave the governor copies. I kept the originals. And what it amounts to, folks, we've known how to solve our energy problem since the mid-50s. We had a generator that was a self-powering, without a need of an operator, operating in the 50s. They took this machine back up to Los Alamos and discarded it. Therefore, why should Los Alamos or any other university in the world put their finances on the line to build something they already know? So I'm telling you, we know how to get rid of this energy crisis, and I think Colonel Corso will become a household word whenever these electromagnetic generators come to fruition. Thank you.
And now one of the longest-serving researchers in the entire field, stretching back over a full half century, Dr. Robert Wood.
Thank you, Steve. On Sunday morning, I'm going to wake you up by talking about Leonard Stringfield's work. He published 2 books and wrote 7 status reports on crash retrievals. And my talk will be in about 3 parts. First, I'll tell you about him as a man. He's a remarkable guy. They called him Webster in high school because he memorized the entire dictionary. Then I'll tell you about the 86 reports that he studied in the 7 crash retrieval status reports. And they're from all over. They deal with aliens, they deal with craft, they deal with recovery teams. And amazingly enough, one of the things that we found is that unlike what everybody assumes, because when Len died about 10 years ago, they assumed that all of his contacts and sources, he died with him and there was no way to go interview the witnesses. It turns out that's not true. 80% of the reports that he has have people you can contact. In fact, just today, I called up one of them to find out if that was true, and it turned out it was. I mean, this guy, Bruce, told me the exact name of a witness that was in one of the reports that only Stan Friedman has known until tonight. So anyway, the third part of my talk will be to speculate a little bit on, well, I'm going to be telling you some examples of some of the amazing recoveries that are in his document. And the third part of my talk will be to try to deal with what the skeptics say. You know, why aren't there hoaxes? Why are there hoaxes? And why would the government cover it up? And how did the government cover it up? I'll answer all those questions probably the same sort of ways that some of our other speakers would want to answer them.
All right, please welcome a researcher that's going to present on one of the more intriguing cases, certainly in the field, Shag Harbor. Please, Don Ledger. Welcome, please.
Gee. I'll ask a question first. How many of you people know where Nova Scotia is? Raise a hand. Wow. This is pretty good. Huh? It's going to make my job a little easier tomorrow. Well, knowing that, this sort of sticks off just northeast of Maine there. There was an incident that occurred back in October 4th, 1967, which created a bit of a flash in the pan, pretty much like Roswell did back in 1947, and then just sort of died until a buddy of mine, a fellow researcher, Chris Stiles, excavated it from the files, and actually a little help from Stanton Friedman to get him on his way, because he wasn't a UFO researcher at the time, just somebody curious. And then about a year later, he dragged me kicking and screaming into the case, and I was able to help him a little bit with some further investigation, discover some more witnesses and so on. Anyway, this is a fascinating case about the supposed impact or crash. We're not exactly sure which way this went. It's beginning to look like a controlled landing in an area called Shag Harbor, just outside, about a mile outside of Shag Harbor on the western approach into Shag Harbor on an area they call the Sound. This is a heavily documented case. Nobody can dispute the fact that something unusual crashed in Shag Harbor in 1967, or something did crash. The military went looking for it. There's a document trail a mile long and a yard wide, and a considerable amount of witnesses who continuously keep coming forward. And I'll tell you about a few of those tomorrow. Now, most people know about the Shag Harbor crash. Somebody mentioned Fate magazine earlier. They actually did a piece on it about 8 or 9 months after the fact. And but there's another component to this that was discovered during the investigation of the original Shag Harbor crash that is more in the line of a crash retrieval, or perhaps an attempt at a crash retrieval that went on during a period of 7 days following the impact at Shag Harbor. Anyway, I'll be telling you about that tomorrow. It's quite a bit to try to squeeze into just an hour, but I'll do the best I can and show you some documents and some graphics and some pictures and so on and so forth. I hope you enjoy it. We'll see you tomorrow morning around 10:45, I think it is.
Now, I believe it's Paul, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Next presenter would be Paul Kimball, who's going to be talking about the Aztec case of 1948. Nice to meet you. Yes, Paul.
Now, I know Jim Mars said he had a very scary story, but I have a scarier story. I was sitting in my office one day at Red Star Films, which is not one of the 5 largest film production companies in the world, but could be someday, up in Nova Scotia, which is why I know where Nova Scotia is, because both Don and I are from there. And I had a project called Do You Believe in Magic? It was a documentary for the Space Channel, which is our sci-fi in Canada, about the Majestic 12 documents. And like you always are when you receive a broadcaster's pre-license, you're very excited. And wow, I get to get paid and work on a project I really want to do. And then I received news, and this is the scary part, that one of our major investors, and in Canada, because we're all lefty pinkos, the film industry is financed by the governments, the provincial and federal governments. And the federal government wasn't going to finance the film. And the federal government wasn't going to invest in the film, even though they'd invested in my previous UFO films, Stanton T. Friedman is real, and he is, because the topic wasn't Canadian enough. Now only in Canada, really. Anyway, so I'm having a bad day. My project is going down the tubes, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to raise the money to fill the hole. And the only option that presents itself to me, this is all relevant, this makes sense, really. The only option that presents itself to me is we do a television series for Bravo about classical music, and in the contingency, I could pull the money out of the corporate overhead and the contingency and throw it into the UFO documentary, and all it means is my chums and I don't get to make our yearly trip to Vegas. And then I call Stan, and I said to Stan, because obviously Stan was going to be heavily involved in the film, I said, Stan, we've got a problem. Don't worry, the film's still going ahead, but this is really going to impact on the amount of travel I can do. And Stan said to me, wise man, he said, well, I have a name. I have a name for you. I said, okay, that's cool. He said, Scott Ramsey, nice guy from North Carolina, businessman. He's been doing a lot of research into another UFO crash case, not Roswell, but Aztec. Now, what I knew of Aztec, was about this much, and what I knew was what most people thought they knew. Well, that's obviously a hoax. But Stan said, you might want to talk to Mr. Ramsey because he has friends who have money. And I said, okay, that's what I'd like to hear. So I did. I talked to Scott, and it turns out he did indeed have friends who have money. And those friends wanted to make a film based on Scott's research, which he's been doing since the late 1980s, into the Aztec case. Now, the scum producer in me said, well, money's money. But the artist, the director in me, said, I have to have free artistic control. I'll make the film. And the catch was, I'd get to go to Aztec to the symposium where I could interview people like Nick here for both films. So, good deal for me. I said, but I'll make the film. You guys invest, but it's my film. So I'll come as I usually do as a skeptic to any of these UFO matters, and I'll treat it as a skeptic. And if I find out, if I come to believe that the Aztec story is truly a hoax, that the story that's been told for 50 years, that it was all made up, is true, then that's what I'm going to put in the film. And you guys have to accept that. And the producer side of me said, are you nuts? But that's a different story. And they did. They said, well, that's fine. All we want you to do is look at the evidence that we've accumulated and tell the story and come to your own conclusions. And so that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow, the film that resulted from that, and some of the conclusions that came out of that were an awful lot different than the conclusions that I thought I was going to reach when I first went in. And I think the film and Scott's work and the book that's coming out by Scott hopefully will bring the Aztec case back where it's belonged for the last 50 years as part of the UFO fabric and part of the UFO story. Thank you.
I will say something I've said before. I believe that the 50-minute television documentary and the 90-minute theater-length documentary will become the most powerful force for social change in the 21st century. And you're watching that happen right now. Last but not least, a very good friend and easily one of the nicest gentlemen in the entire field, and not just because he's Canadian, Grant Cameron.
Thanks, Steve. I'm actually giving two presentations because I'm very long-winded. The presentation I originally started with was the presentation I'd given at the X conference, which was called Glimpses of Disclosure. And last year I gave a speech here on the presidents and crash flying saucers. I didn't get all the presidents done. What I do, let's give you an idea of what I'm going to do. I have the presidents, crash flying saucers, their role. I've spent almost every waking moment thinking about things. I don't know what you think about. I think about, was the president briefed? What did they brief the president on? How much does the president know? These kind of things. So this is what I'm going to discuss. What I've concluded so far, which presidents have been briefed, what's involved in the briefing. In part one, I'm going to start out and I'm going to deal with the presidents, but I'm also going to deal with the Canadian crash flying saucer angle, and that is the fellow who ran the Canadian investigation into flying saucers in the early 1950s. I'm going to discuss his role in crash flying saucers, what he knew, and some of you may be pretty stunned. I don't know if you know any of the story. Most of it is documented. It is written down. I'm going to go through this, how it links to the United States and to the presidents. I'm also going to, the thing that I've spent a lot of time, I work a lot of time on the presidents. I also spent a lot of time working on leaks. When the Woods received these 3,000 plus page documents, everybody went and looked, is this real, isn't real, is this a hoax, that's not a hoax, whatever. I only had one question. Where are the documents coming from, and why is someone releasing this mass material into the UFO community? I've spent a pile of time trying to figure out all the different people who have been approached in the UFO community with various things. And what I seem to come to the conclusion with that better than half, maybe the vast majority of stuff that we believe in the UFO community today is not stuff that we discovered. It is stuff that has been leaked to us from inside the government. And a lot of these, we know what the leaks are. Some of the stories, main two stories that I'm going to deal with is one that happened in 1959. It involved the CIA, Navy intelligence, FBI, the president, and involved a lot of people. It involved the top intelligence officer in the CIA in the 1950s. I'm going to deal with that. It's a story that was leaked into the UFO community. The other story that I'm going to deal with a lot of leaks, like I'm going to talk about Linda Howe a bit, stuff, approaches that were made to Linda Howe. But the other one I'm going to deal with, as some of you are familiar with, I've spent a lot of time on, is the Holloman Air Force Base film. This is a story that, like the Majestic documents, the MJ-12 document, this is a story that was purposely leaked into the UFO community. I've spent a lot of time interviewing the people who were involved. I know a lot of stuff that people haven't heard before. I'm going to go into fairly great detail, and I'm actually going to show what actually may be a clip of the actual Holloman Air Force Base film. The last thing that I'm going to rant and rave about a bunch of stuff. The last thing I've added, it's not in the proceedings, that's just happened, is I'm going to deal with whether, I don't know how many people are familiar with the General Wesley Clark recent statements. Okay, there's only one or two, so this will be new. The fellow who broke the story is sitting at the front table here, one of the smartest people in ufology, David Rudiak. Early in the campaign, presidential campaign, Wesley Clark was looked at as being the guy that could possibly win the thing for the Democrats. He was asked a question by Jay Buckley, who's an astronaut in the New Hampshire primary. He was asked his view on space, and he started to rant and rave about the fact that he believed that we could go past the speed of light, and that he'd argued with physicists about this, and he believed that we'd go past the speed of light. And I immediately contacted a number of researchers in the United States and said, somebody's got to ask this guy the question that I asked Dick Cheney: have you been briefed on the subject of UFOs? I don't care what you think about it. I don't care whether you've had a sighting. I just want to know, did someone walk in your office and brief you? Nobody asked the question until, what was it, 2 weeks ago. And David Rudiak ran into him in Reno, Nevada, and asked him the question. And if you're here Sunday afternoon, you'll hear what Wesley Clark responded, and he didn't say it's a joke. Thanks.
Do people have pads to write questions on? Have you had these? We need to get these passed out. Lori, would you help me here? Just kind of pass those out. And while you all are getting those and thinking up some questions, I'll tell you a quick story. In early December of 2001, I went up to New York to tape a television show for a series that Dan Aykroyd was producing called Out There. And in fact, it was the first segment, the first show that he taped. And it was great fun, and Dan's a great guy. 3 weeks later, the show was canceled before it even got out, right, by Vivendi Universal. Last week, I was in L.A., and I went down to the media center there, and I taped a segment for a show that's been on quite a while, kind of popular amongst the people that watch that channel, formerly the Tech TV, now called G4, right, Tech Television. And the show is called Unscrewed with Martin Sargent. It's an up-and-coming channel, and it's really kind of cool. And I taped a show there. We went about 8 minutes, live audience, the whole bit. It was really great. I just found out yesterday that show's been canceled. So if there's anybody out there who are producing a television show you're trying to get out from under because it's kind of a burden, I'll be happy to interview with you at your convenience. I called him up, and I just said, I hope I'm not the reason. But I'm sure there'll be something else to replace it. So if you start work on your questions, start writing them out, and we can work them forward. And if you want to ask a question at the mic, feel free to step forward at any time. And we want to get as many questions in as possible, so please direct your question at the most likely person on the panel, not to the whole panel. I can assure you that if anybody on the panel wants to jump in, they will do so. All right, let's start with Dr. Burks.
Yes.
Can you get right up there?
Yeah.
Can you?
Is Paul still at the table?
Yes.
All right.
Paul Davids.
All right. Yeah, Paul. What is your assessment of the probability that after we fight terrorism in, say, 10 or 20 or 30 years, we will be mobilized to fight the alleged ETs? This was reportedly Werner von Braun's concern when he expressed that after the war on terrorism, there'd be a war with space-based weapons against the ETs.
This question is to me?
Yeah.
Is this mic on, Ted?
Yeah, go ahead. I don't think we have a mic, so I'll speak with a booming voice.
Try the other one. See if the other one's on.
This is the secondary mic.
That's it. I have to stand up.
Douglas MacArthur was quoted twice on this subject. Once at West Point in the mid-1950s, I believe, or the early 1950s, and once in an interview with the New York Times around 1960, I believe it was, saying this very thing, that the peoples of the world would have to unite and make a common front against a threat or enemy from some other place in the galaxy. And that always seemed strange. Why was that injected into the New York Times and West Point? Why did he say that? We never really learned much more about it. And there's been a lot of speculation about that. I'm not sure. I'm still grappling. I haven't given up my skepticism, and I'm still grappling with where the truth is and how much is spin. The fact that I think that there's a strategic advantage for our country if there is a widespread, prevalent belief from other countries of the world that we do have this extraterrestrial technology, that we do have advanced things in hiding that no one can guess, and that there may be a threat out there. I mean, I think that while the government spends a lot of time denying, the more they deny, the more a lot of people believe it. And I think that there's a value for us in the world believing that we have this superior technology and these contacts that none of us have ever directly seen. So I don't know how many of the statements by established people, by important people in the military, whoever it might be to, sort of further a belief that they see has a certain utility with the weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein. Well, we know now that he didn't have the weapons of mass destruction that we thought we did, but he wasn't willing to admit that beforehand. We hear now because he didn't want Iran to know that he didn't really have it. And look at what resulted from what was really a bluff on his part. So, I mean, in trying to keep things as real as I can, I'll tell you, I don't know how much of what we're hearing about the whole ET connection is bluff and how much is real, and who the real witnesses are and who they aren't. I think that there really is meat there, based upon all I've been through. But I can't say I think that the people of the Earth are going to be fighting ETs in 10 years. I mean, I'd like to see the first ET. I'd like to see what their weapons are, and then I'll answer your question.
Okay. You say you want to jump in on this, Ron?
Yeah.
By the way, those that are leaving the room, speakers, just so they can do the interview on the show. So.
My name's Ron Reguera. I've got 30 years in aerospace engineering, the last 25 of which were in space surveillance. And Joe, I can tell you with absolute certainty, we do have a space warfighters policy. It's set up. It's an official part of the U.S. government, official part of the Air Force. They are planning for war and dominance in space, and it's been going on now for about 15 years. So it's a real thing. I can provide you more information. That's another talk that I haven't put together yet. But if you're interested offline, we can talk about that.
Okay. Anyone else? Grant wants to comment. Ted, are both of these mics out over here?
That one should work.
Okay. All right, fine.
Okay, this will be short. President Clinton was actually asked the question. He was asked the question on, I can't remember the guy that interviewed him. He was asked the question, this was just after Independence Day, the movie came out. Clinton said it was the best movie he'd seen. He just loved it. It was privately screened for him. And he was asked, would we win the battle? And he said, yeah, we'd come together, and I believe we'd win the battle against the aliens.
Thank you. Okay, quick note here. I believe that this is for Ryan. Fate magazine, the security guard said that the September issue is for free, not October. Okay. All right, make that clarification. All right. We have a question. We'll always take those first.
Yeah, who would like to address the false rapture issue? Anyone? I came in a little bit late, so I'm not sure who's particular to that issue.
Do you say rapture?
The false rapture issue.
False rapture, okay.
Yes. Is there anyone here that can address that particular specialty?
That's an interesting specialty. False rapture meaning. Okay, well, why don't you expand on that?
Okay, I'll give you the understanding that I have that, the Catholic Church came up with the false rapture doctrine years and years ago, and all of the churches pretty much, predominantly through the ecumenical movement, have come to understand that there will be a rapture of a sort where our Savior will be returning for the people of this earth, and unfortunately we do have some counterfeits out there that have been setting up a false rapture. And there are books that have been written on it. And I'm just wondering what is being done through media channels to get to the churches, to get them to understand that this is a counterfeit of true scripture and true doctrine. And I just wondered who would be able to speak to that issue.
Interesting. Do we have anybody?
No, it's not relevant.
It's not relevant. To a lot of people it will be.
Oh, it's an interesting subject, no question. And I think it sort of ties into that last question in the sense of being set up for something very massive, something global, whatever, that in fact is not the case for other purposes. So it kind of falls in that genre. I'm afraid, though, that I think our speakers don't have the knowledge to really answer that question.
I was going to say, Jim Mars was sitting on the end. Is he around? I was at the UFO conference when he was speaking, and he may have background on that.
Well, you know, Jim covers a lot of territory.
All right. Well, I'll be here, try to be here the rest of the weekend.
Look,
and maybe
I will direct Jim toward you when the opportunity presents.
Wonderful. Thank
you. Another, Dr. John Miller, please. By the way, Dr. Miller and Lisa Davis just completed a wonderful conference in Los Angeles called the New FOC.
Thank you, Steve. I was wondering if any of the panelists have read the two books, Blowback and The Sorrows of Empire by Chalmers Johnson. Blowback was written before 9/11, and The Sorrows of Empire was written after 9/11 by Professor Johnson. The question is, if you've read it, how does his analysis of the U.S. global military apparatus relate to and security apparatus relate to this UFO topic? Does anybody have any?
read those books?
But it relates to crash retrieval procedures. I don't know. I'll throw
Briefly.
my 2 cents in.
I just read the internet now. I can't open a book.
My only thought really is that, how does the military do a crash retrieval? I mean, what is the process to manage and track and have teams stationed across the country and the world to do that? And that's sort of discussed in this 1952 or 1954 Special Operations Manual. And that's my comment, really. But it may not be on point.
Well,
Go ahead, John.
I'll add a comment then that Professor Johnson's book documents that the U.S. has at least 725 military bases all over the world. So that makes sort of a credible story for how they could get hold of UFOs that go down in places other than the U.S.
I will respond to the point. I think this is a relevant point. I did some research recently for an article that I was writing, and what I learned was that as of 2002, fairly recent, the military budget of the United States exceeds all of the rest of the military budgets of all other countries now. And the number 2 military budget is the Soviet Union, which is a modest $90 billion. Our budget is $450 billion. All right. Our black budget is somewhere in the range of $30 to $80 billion. And then, of course, we have an above black budget on intelligence of around $30 to $45 billion. Look, I want a defended country. I want a safe country. But it's a legitimate thing to ask yourself, exactly who are we spending $450 billion to defend ourselves against? All right? And that raises the specter of, could it be non-human entities? And if so, I would kind of like to know that. All right? Just like to know it. Seems like an important bit of information. So, but I'm speculating here, believe me. I don't know, but those numbers I gave you are correct. Next question, Господин Solikov.
Yeah, how come I don't see Dr. David Pace on the Soviet tackle of it? How come he's not on the panel?
He's late. He's coming in by plane and he's running late, Michael.
Oh, okay, so
he will be here a little bit later. Okay, I've got a couple questions here. Let me get into these. Okay. By the way, there was a question here. Apparently, there was some atmospheric lights around 6:30 tonight that startled some people around from their hotel room. Did anybody see any of those lights? Did anybody see anything unusual? This lady did, I know. No one else. Okay. And another gentleman there? Okay, about 3 that sort of came in, moved irregular, and disappeared. Noted. Could have been one of Bob Bigelow's private space flights, who knows? All right, question. How widely known is it that the public is being educated about the extraterrestrial phenomena through science fiction? Well, I know the person to direct that question to, and that would be Paul Davids. I think that mic right there works. Try it out, Paul. This one right here. Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
The question is, how widely known is it, or to put it another way, is it a reasonable thing to think that the public is being educated about the extraterrestrial phenomena through science fiction movies primarily?
I think that's what's been going on since the early 1950s. I'm something of a historian of science fiction films. Had the very good fortune of knowing producer George Powell, who made 4 great science fiction films. First, Destination Moon, which preceded by just about exactly 20 years, the first man landing on the moon. And he showed step by step just how it would be done. He produced War of the Worlds, the 1952-53 version starring Gene Barry, When Worlds Collide, which was recapitulated later by Hollywood with Deep Impact and Armageddon. And then he produced The Conquest of Space, which showed the first voyage to Mars. A great visionary. Howard Hawks, who produced The Thing in around 1950, The Thing from Another World, 3 years after the Roswell incident. This is the story of the Roswell UFO crash set in the Arctic. They just changed the location, but all the players are the same. The story of the cover-up is the same. I think sometimes Hollywood science fiction has gone off the deep end and been pretty outrageous and sometimes silly. That serves a purpose too, really, in helping people not to take it so seriously, to make it something that you can laugh at. I think somebody just mentioned Mars Attacks as a more recent example.
One of the all-time greats.
Been a couple of good books written about the subject too. There's one called Saucer Movies by I think it's Paul Meehan, I think is his last name, and then an author named Rux, I think, wrote Bruce Rux, Hollywood versus the Aliens. So there's a lot of material on that, and yes, I think there's been an intimate relationship between the people who make movies and the people that have been keeping these secrets and dishing the information out just piecemeal.
I have deep suspicions about that myself. By the way, Paul, he's not kidding. He may be the single most knowledgeable person in the United States on the subject of the relationship between science fiction and the subject, period. I mean, I'm telling you, and he should write a full-fledged book about it. I have a little story regarding that. I really tried to take on Steven Spielberg when he came out with the Taken miniseries, this massive miniseries. It was a big deal for me. And I was in close contact. I mean, they contacted me months before that, and they wanted to talk about how to promote it, and they wanted to talk about getting an advocacy thing together and everything else. And I spent quite a bit of time talking with them, and they went off and did that. I never heard from them again, but that's all right. The point is that series was very significant, and I really took on Steven Spielberg. I really thought that he was making a move there, and I still think that he did. But right after the thing aired, he was cornered by a Hollywood reporter from the Hollywood, it's a famous publication in Hollywood, and asked him directly about it. And he backed off and basically said, well, you know, it's just a fiction and so forth and so forth. And that bothered me, and I actually contacted one of the VPs at Sci-Fi Channel and told him to convey my displeasure, you know, because Steven Spielberg's a great man, and we know that in the movie Schindler's List, he made an extremely important political moral statement, so he's not above that. But when it comes to this issue, he spent a fortune to put on that miniseries, but when asked simply, what are your views about it, he really couldn't say, right? So this issue is really difficult for people of great stature to speak publicly about sometimes, but not all. And eventually I went on George Norrie's show a while back, and I got into this. And a little story came back to me about a month later. Somebody apparently was in the restaurant where there a bunch of Hollywood people were having dinner, including Spielberg. This is a late dinner at one of these restaurants. I was on a show, Norrie, I think I did the first hour, so I was on right around 10:30, and I was giving it to Steven. I mean, I'm just being nice, understand. You know, I never try to irritate, you know, a billionaire if I can avoid it. The point is that I got into, you know, what was, you know, it would be good if he were to step forward and say, look, I just didn't make all these movies because I think this is a joke. I think there's something here. Do you realize how powerful it would be? They said that somebody walked in the room and said, Steven, somebody's talking to you about on the radio right now, and they rushed out to hear the thing. Little vignette, what can I say? Oh, here's another story, another question rather. This is for Ryan Wood. In your presentation on Deadly Database, are you going to get into this rather extraordinary story about not missing, but dead microbiologists turning up all over the world, driving off bridges, you know, falling, you know, into the swimming pool and so forth?
Yeah, that's I'll just touch on it a little bit. If you really add up all the people that are suspicious, the database gets very big. And I had to focus in on the people that I thought were obviously linked and clearly in the UFO community. But that's an excellent area to expand on and further study. Because what you have to do, in essence, is do little mini reviews of each murder. And it's a serious challenge to come up with, well, you know, I need the original autopsy report for somebody. I want to read that. And you got to go through each person and create a little case file. You basically have to become a detective on a bunch of murders. And it's a serious challenge for one person, but it can be done. But that's an excellent area, and we'll touch on it briefly. But that is very fascinating that within a very short course of time, many microbiologists working on allegedly advanced technology, maybe alien bodies, who knows, that's the speculation, died mysteriously. And the odds are astronomical that they would all die in a short event. Nick Redfern, he may have left.
He'll be back.
He'll be back. Is also another person asked the same question, because I think he's studied and looked at this a little more detail than I have.
Yeah, this is another example of things that drive me crazy. I'm following this a little bit, reasonable amount, and in an age of bioterrorism, where we're all expecting, the bug to come. Lord knows what they have in store for us. Microbiologists and high-level genetic scientists and so forth are dying all over the world. It's a global story. And MSNBC, CNBC, CNN, NBC News, the litany of these, they haven't gotten around to that story yet. Fortunately, they have been able to maintain sufficient resources to keep us constantly updated on an hourly basis of the Scott Peterson trial. If he was a microbiologist, I suppose they wouldn't cover it. All right, now let's see. Let me go here. This is from a former Los Alamos employee. Worked at Los Alamos for 40 years. And this is to the gentleman that was talking about the advanced energy system, which I think was either Don or no. It was Chuck, and Chuck is not here. I'm going to save that for later. Okay. Good question. This question is loaded. Okay, I'm serious. I'm not making a joke, right? This question is loaded because implied in it is a whole series of extremely significant points that we don't spend enough time thinking about, or we jump to conclusions about. All right? Here's the question. Given the superior technology in UFOs, why do they crash? Before I pass that question on, let me raise just a couple of these points, all right? For those who feel compelled to take the view that these extraterrestrials are gods, all right? All-powerful, transcendent beings. Please try to keep in mind that these gods are crashing their vehicles into the earth. It is not generally associated with gods. I have been driving since the age of 16, and I have never had a single accident. Does that mean I'm smarter than extraterrestrials? I don't know, right? But they crash, they make mistakes, they do things wrong. And it is my view that if we knew everything, I suspect we would know that they're not as advanced as we think. And that is extremely important to factor into your thinking. It doesn't mean that all are in that view. I mean, those that haven't crashed. And so we will assume that they're better drivers. But we don't know as much about them because we don't have their stuff, right? We just have the stuff from those that crash, which means that we have, somewhat inferior technology, which should work well for us. But this is a very important question, right? An incredibly important question.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to take this on?
Yeah, I would. I'll have my father make a comment as well. Okay. That was one of the posters that I wanted to have up on the walls, and the one like Linda over there is, why do they crash? And I wrote it all up, and I got it. It's sitting in my room. And because I thought it was very important. I mean, and somebody, put this question in. And I talked to my father about it, and we chatted back and forth and came up with a synopsis of why they crash. And there's really two things. One is, like you said, they crash, period. The other is we shot them down. And within each of those two themes, there's some sub-bullets and sub-discussions. In the case we shot them down, there's evidence of tactical nuclear warheads being shot at saucers, Upnot and Keyhole. In the case of UFOs flying around, we have jet fighter pilots engaging and trying to lock on and shoot down. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. So we've tried many cases with our artillery and shells at the Los Angeles air raid to try to knock them down. Maybe not deliberately, but in some cases they may have been successful. But there's a deliberate attempt to try to shoot them down. That's one thing that goes on. And sometimes they've been successful. And then the other case is they crash. Either they're rotten drivers, like that's possible, or we may have a warped sense of of a human emotion really about them. I mean, we rescue people that die or that crash their planes. We don't engage in wars where the fighter pilots take off from the aircraft carriers and are one-way missions. They don't come back. And so if you think of these craft as disposable biological robots and craft, and the information is sent back instantaneously, they don't need to come back. So that's one other scenario. I might, add my father comment further.
Is this live? No. It is. Good. Well, I'd like to add to that this scenario where they crash when we didn't shoot them down. When you think about landing on a foreign planet, for example, when we land on Jupiter, we're concerned about the electrostatic fields. And if you look at the electrostatic fields on planet Earth, it turns out that lightning occurs because of those electrostatic fields. And the energy involved in one lightning stroke is easily enough to bring down one UFO. And so that's an easy scenario for a crashed UFO.
By the way, I think this would be a good point to mention something. I think it's very relevant. Some of these questions are pretty advanced, okay? Perfectly appropriate. You got your 101, your 102, your master's program, your PhD, whatever. And they get into some highly complex questions, and you should understand that not everybody on a panel like this necessarily agrees with some of these issues. One person's, for instance, facts is another person's speculation. If you're not in that subject, you may not even know what would be fact or speculative. So when you get in panels, don't assume that because someone is talking about why vehicles crash, that the other person thinks that there even are vehicles. But I want to generalize this more. Not everybody has the same level of view about the facts that are being put forward. And so that's important to keep in mind. Absolutely. Will that work for you? Try that. Watch that cup.
We're still talking about the crashes.
The crashes, yes.
Test. Let's look at on the Earth side, the Earth vehicle side of that question. I'm a pilot myself. There hasn't been an airplane built in this world that hasn't crashed. They all crash sooner or later. The only one that held out there for the longest time was the Concorde, and finally that crashed. Right from the Wright brothers on upward. Which brings up, that question to me is a bit of a two-sided thing. UFOs crash possibly and probably because, well, we can't call them human, but intelligent anyway, and sooner or later they're going to make a mistake. As the good doctors mentioned, there's lightning that can bring them down and all kinds of other things, weather, lightning related as well. But the other side of that coin is the argument against one of the arguments against UFOs, if you want to call it against, is that a lot of the UFOs that are seen are top secret aircraft that have been developed by, usually it's mentioned as the United States, which is it probably is, but I'm not saying the UFOs are, but if they've developed all of these aircraft since the Second World War, where are the crashed ones? They all crash. Doesn't matter how sophisticated they are, they crash. And they're not always going to crash in some and really good spots where the military can get at them right away. Maybe Kecksburg was something like that. I don't know. I'm not deeply into that case. But if there's so many of these technologically superior aircraft that we're building, or at least the Americans are building, and I say Americans because I'm Canadian, forgetting that I'm sitting in a room full of Americans, but that they're building, I'm telling you right now, there's no way that they're able to build these things in such a manner that they will not crash or they will not be found sooner or later. And those crashes, or those superior aircraft that were being built that were being mistaken for UFOs back in the 50s, where are they now? We keep getting that same story. I get that all the time. And for me as a pilot, I'll tell you right now that 9 times out of 10, any UFO sighting that you see just does not act like any aircraft, and we do not have the technology. I don't care how dark it is right now, unless it's some kind of back-engineered UFO. We just don't have it yet to do it. Triangles and so on, NIDS notwithstanding. But anyway, I'll rant and rave on that on another subject some other time. But
that's all right. Good question. Yes, please. Oh, wait a minute.
30 seconds on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One moment. I'm sorry. Ron wanted to get in something.
Yeah, there's another thing I think is important to consider. Their supply lines are extremely long. We don't know how far they are. And imagine, if you will, the problems we have fighting a war halfway around the world. Their supply lines are light years. So they have a logistics problem just keeping up with the hardware that's here, and that's another very critical subject is they're built by the lowest bidder too.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
2 years in Laughlin at the UFO conference, we were invited into a group of small people where there was a videotape shown of a gentleman who was involved with the human alien genome research.
This would
and
be
gave
Birch?
Pretty, can't remember the name.
Dan Birch.
Could be, but anyway, he said you might not see me after this videotape is exposed. But anyway, he detailed some of the things going on at Dulce, New Mexico. Is there anyone here that will be able to talk a little bit on the genome research and what kind of expose is going on regarding it?
Not Dan Birch per se, but rather issues involving speculation about Dulce and its base. Who has some thoughts on that? Okay, Linda's the person on that. We're going to hold that question, and when she gets back, we will take a shot at it. Here's a question for Jim Mars, which I'm happy to give to him when he comes back, but I think I can handle it as well. I'm going to read it and then translate it. The question is, education for personal use or activism for public use? What do you believe the balance should be to keep both internal and external momentum going in the UFO community? I'll translate this question. In other words, what is the relationship and the proper balance between the simple passing of information, meaning here's what I got, take it, do what you want with it, all right, enjoy, read my book, come to the conference, and with activism, meaning here's some information, you need to address this. You need to deal with this. There are reasons why you need to deal with this. No activist can go in front of anybody and tell them you just need to know this and act. They got to tell why, right? When thousands of activists poured into the South in the 50s and the early 60s, they had a very clear reason. There were plenty of books and courses and studies about the voting issues in the United States, racial issues and everything else. But in order to actually get on a bus and travel down south and risk your life and a lot of other things, you have to have a reason to do it. And so the first and most important point that has to be made is that has the information which has been gathered for 50 years, gentlemen like Robert Wood, Stan Friedman, and so many others, people here, has it provided specific reasons why citizens of the United States must act upon it? All right? If it hasn't, then activism has no place. And the gathering of information, which in a sense is pure science. There are a lot of people that do pure science, nothing more than have the information. I mean, they would study the internal aspects of the atom their entire life and wouldn't have the slightest interest in building anything or doing anything with it. They just want to know how the atom works. That's pure information. Activism, of course, is something else. My work is all about that exact thing. The work of others who are activists in the field is trying to explain to the American people and others why the information we gathered not only is important to view from the standpoint of acting, but actually is essential, and that it has created a compelling case, immediate action to be taken place, lest we have major problems. And I'll be getting into that a little bit at the keynote tomorrow night, which I'd like to promote, the banquet. In some ways, I'll touch on that some more. But obviously, you go to my websites, that's what it's all about. And what is happening now is a movement is being born right now. It's been around since 1947, but it only started to coalesce as a movement around 1992. And this movement is the political process leading to the disclosure event, the most profound event, secular event in human history. Nothing else comes close. If somebody's got a candidate, I want to hear it. And I said secular event, and you can understand why, can't you? Because in a number of religions, there are events which would transcend even that, and that's fine. So that's kind of my answer to that question, but I'll certainly give that to Jim. And if somebody else wants to comment, you can? Sure. Can you get that mic right there, Grant?
Okay, just repeat.
I consider a grant an activist too. What is the proper balance between the simple raising of awareness, here's some information, and activism where here's some information, you've got to take action now?
Okay, I don't know if I have it in my lecture, but I deal with this quite a bit, dealing with activism. I think basically when you come to the UFO field, you have Steve Bassett and a few others, and really everybody else is standing there and just watching it, reading books, interested in it. What I have looked at in history is that any major event that the government has to deal with has been dealt with under severe pressure, whether it was women's right to vote, whether it was the gay rights issue, whether it was to end the war in Vietnam. It was huge protests on the Washington Mall. It was people getting up and just fed up and wanting it ending. An example is this incident with General Clark. When General Clark came out and made this statement about going past the speed of light, I received information from somebody inside NIDS to tell me that he had been briefed on crash flying saucers. The source was legitimate. I knew this was real, so I contacted a number of leading people in the UFO community. Clark was on the campaign trail. He was had the National Press Corps with him, and I tried to get people to ask General Clark the question, have you been briefed on the subject of UFOs? And nobody would do it. We had rooms. We knew where he was speaking. We had people who were supposed to go in the room and ask him the question. And these are not just ordinary people. These are people that are state directors in MUFON. And I got responses back. We don't want to embarrass him. I have somebody in my family who is going into the government at the present time. I don't want to get them in trouble. And one of the things that I found in this activism thing is that there really isn't very much activism at all, except for example, Steve Bassett. My impression is that when it hits home, when the pain of $20 a barrel gas, or $20 a gallon gas, or something like that, then it will be an issue that will be more than the economy or things that people are worried about now. It'll become an issue. Right now, as I look at to brief a president, they can go to a president and say, it's really not that critical. We can drill another oil well in Alaska. We can do this kind of stuff, and let's put it off. And I think there has to be a lot more pain before people will get riled up about it and start protesting. And once there's protest, that's the way the government works. The government works under pressure. It never is there an issue that the government says, this is a good idea, I think we'll do it. It's always push, push, push to get it through.
I've got two more things I want to say here. You're in my wheelhouse here. First of all, I want to clarify here. I'm not the only activist in this field. Believe me, there are others. Stephen Greer got in the field in '92, and I know what he did. Very controversial guy, but I know what he did. And what he did was important. Right? If you don't like him, that's fine, or you do like him, doesn't matter. He did what he did, and it was a very significant component. And he may do more, but he was an activist, all right? He was out there doing stuff. And by doing things like that, you can make people unhappy. Trust me. The activist is in the arena. You get in the arena, you're going to take your hits, you're going to make people upset, but that's the nature. That's the package. Norio Hayakawa.
I might even say it's not activism, it's leadership.
Well,
I mean, that's the whole thing.
Well, but you can be an activist follower. You know, I mean, and even activism has its leaders, and it has people to follow. The support, right? When you're out there, maybe going door to door. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can participate. But Norio Hayakawa, very interesting work that he did, and of course Ron Rager and Elaine Douglas, early activists in Operation Right to Know. Dan Pinchas, and there are others emerging that you may not know about. They're not as well known. They're there. But let me tell you a little story that really sums this up perfectly. About 3 years ago, because I'd had some conversation, and by the way, let me know when this is going too long. About 3 years ago, because of some conversations I had, I sort of got this idea that what would happen if 100,000 contactees actually, I use the word contactee, which is a general term to cover it all, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. I think that's fair, right? What if 100,000 turned up on the Mall in Washington to listen to 10 or 12 speakers in the field, accompanied by the usual bells and whistles? There's a template for this. It's easily enough done. It tends to cost somewhere between $50 and $1 million, depending upon how many people you're trying to get. So, because and it occurred to me that people can come to Washington and go out in the mall, and it's pretty much anonymous. They're not going to get known. Nobody's going to figure out who they are. So you can be a contactee, even a closeted contactee, and you could come down there. It would be extraordinary. There's no question. I think the news would cover it. I think Dan Rather would go, 100,000 contactees in a mall. I want to check that out there, right? So I called up some abduction researchers to get their views. Because in order to pull this off, probably some of the top people in the field who are doing the work would have to sort of get the word out through the network that we're going to do this. Start talking to your friends of friends of friends of friends and support groups, and let's start getting feedback, get this in motion. And overall, the response I get was, not going to happen. I don't think it probably can't happen. It might help, but it can't happen. And one very prominent researcher said it would be a calamity, a total disaster. I thought about it some more, and I said, yeah, it's not going to happen. I believe the nature of this particular issue is such that you are not going to see those 100, 500, or even 1 million people on the mall until after disclosure. It is not going to happen pre-disclosure. And it will happen post-disclosure because obviously the moment that event takes place, all of this is validated. Well, not all. I mean, all of the correct information is validated. 50 years of work by 200 million people overnight. Bingo. And the focus on the government will be extraordinary, and everybody is going to want the same thing, more information. And if you're a closeted contactee, you're really going to want some information. And the government, I believe, is probably going to try to play this very tight. And they're going to give you about a cup, and they're going to keep a gallon, and they're going to say, can't show you that now, and a battle is going to begin. And that battle is going to go on for a certain length of time, and people are going to get really irritated, and that's when 1 million are going to show up on the mall, and they're going to say, we want the rest of the information, or we're throwing all of you out of this town. But before, it's not going to happen, because this is so transcendent. It's visceral, but an extremely cerebral cortex level. I mean, it's not like having, you know, your cousins and your brothers coming back in body bags from a war. It's not like, you know, suffering under, you know, segregation, right, for years and years. It is an extremely complex thing, and to coalesce it and actually get people, the ultimate test of activism, to get in their car and come to Washington, it's not going to happen. But it may happen, and it will be equally valuable even in post-disclosure. Michael?
Yeah, I wanted to comment to what Grant Cameron said before you told that story, and what Grant Cameron was saying about all of these. I was a little disappointed to hear that people at the level of MUFON state directors would not go to that level of activism. But I have to comment that it really is. I mean, it was like 1.5 to 2 years ago when I realized that ufology is not just about saucers, it's also about the courage and the fire, because eventually, I mean, after you've read all the books on the saucers and all this stuff, you pretty much know the field, and from that point on, when you keep going to the conferences, you don't really hear much new information, but you do if you're really interested in activism. At that point, you want to hear those speakers who are talking about courage, who have had personal experience with MILABs, and who have been tortured, and who have been taken to those secret bases in military abductions. That's what MILABs means, and had those things done to them. And just as a little note to anybody here, because I'm sure that with the room this full, there are probably quite a few people who do want to be activists and who are activists. I mean, if you want to be an activist, you become an activist. You don't need a license for that. So for people who are activists and who want to become active and want to network more with activists, I'm hoping in the future, I mean, it depends on my schedules, how many other things I need to do, but at some point in the future, I want to set up some online mechanisms to make it easier for to meet other activists and go into really active fields. But what I do want to mention that there are people who think that, like what you said, that for some people the fact that we are being denied this most profound reality of our time, well, that's not like being like segregation. That's not like having your relatives come up in body bags. Well, I have to disagree. For some people, being denied the most profound reality is so unacceptable that, to use my own example, What?
I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, so to use my own example, I have had a woman whom I loved mutilated and half murdered by the shadow government, and I have given up a career, a big software engineering career, to do this and to go fully into the UFO research.
Okay.
And there are all sorts of, there's no need to enumerate all the shadow government assaults and stuff like that. And I do want to thank Melinda Leslie. Melinda Leslie is another person of extreme courage, despite all the assault on her, who nonetheless is committed to the truth.
Thank you, Michael. He brings up a very interesting point, and I'll get to the other questions. What did the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, the three major activist events of the last 100 years, have in common? The issues, not just the issues, but the actual specifics of the issues were playing out completely in the public marketplace. What is the case here? And why is this so dangerous? The specifics are playing out behind the curtains of the secret empire. We are dealing with issues that have been able to be sequestered under the most complex, advanced system of secrecy ever created. It is the difference between having a severe rash and having a giant tumor in your gut. Trust me, you want the rash because you will see it early and you will treat it early and you will survive. The tumor in the gut is going to kill you. How do you get people to get galvanized about something that they are told doesn't even exist? It's as if the entire South started a public relations campaign in 1955 in which they were successfully able to convince the rest of the country that not only was there no discrimination in the South, there were no African Americans there, and we believed it and said there's no issue here. There's no need to even take a bus down there. That's how hard this is. And the other point that I want to make is that we need activists, right? But we all can't be an activist, all right? Trust me, most of you don't want to be one. What we need is support for activism. Support for activism from people who will then go around, and conduct the rest of their lives. If the support is there, I assure you the activists will emerge immediately to utilize that support and end this cover-up. Next question, please.
First of all, I'd like to say I appreciate the compassion of
the
young gentleman here. Your
last two
compassion
questions.
and your sacrifice, by the way, because many of us have had friends and relatives sacrificed to the prison systems and a variety of things. What I'm here, I believe, tonight is to speak about what I know about the Republic, Nevada Republic in specific. There's 200 that meet every month, and we have moved from the public side, which doesn't have any rights as a subject of the U.S. corporation, to privatization, the private side as expatriate.
Please, you must clarify, what is the Nevada Republic?
Well, you'll have to go online because it's probably a pretty big description behind that, but look under Nevada commonlawvenue.com, and these republics are set up all over the United States, have been in several years of existence, and basically spell out our basic beliefs in the Bill of Rights, which have been guaranteed to us, and the Human Rights Declaration under the UN, a variety of things, but some pretty good studies under that. And again, if you're going to fight these issues, you have to secure your status, so to speak, moving from the public side, which is under the U.S. corporation, which we know is bankrupt, into the private side, and there are two sides, so do a little study on that.
NevadaRepublic.com.
Well, Nevada, you can look under that possibly, but NevadaCommonLawVenue.com and CommonLawVenue.com.
Okay.
But 200 strong every month. It's 10 months old, and a lot of research, a lot of background.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you.